Okay, so we continue today our discussion of Latin American history. The other two guests flaked out on us. I guess the Peruvian and the Spaniard didn't feel comfortable being around Mexicans. So we are going to talk about how there's discrimination within Latinos and even within Mexico. People from the north, people from the south, people from the middle of Mexico, they all hate each other. And then you come over here and you complain because people have issues with Latinos. We're also going to be discussing how to overcome stereotypes. And there's some stereotypes that I don't even understand. We have someone who actually was born in America, and I would like for him to explain to us Cheech and Chong, Cholos, all kinds of stuff that I had no clue it even existed until I came to America. And then somehow we get categorized under those terms. And he's freezing or pretending to be freezing in the bottom video. But so we were talking about the caste system last time. I really feel that is what has brought a lot of problems to Mexico and Latin America. And when I was in Mexico, I felt, and I still feel today, that Mexico is even more racist than the U.S. Would my guests agree with that, based on what I saw as a kid and what I was told from my own family members? They discriminated people who were native to Mexico, or the mestizos, who are a mixture between Spaniards and native Mexicans. Any thoughts on that?
Figueroa, how are you?
I don't personally have any. I don't know much about Mexico. Those specifics you covered. I know I can relate to some of you. When I was a kid, when you talk about Cheech and Chong, you talk about. You guys are younger than me. There was a show, Chico and the Man. It was on, I think it was NBC television. It was supposed to be a Chicano.
Freddie Prinze Jr.
And he was actually played Puerto Rican. What?
Freddie Prinze Jr.?
Yeah, Freddie Prinze Sr. Freddie Prinze Sr.
Senior.
Jr. is, yeah, Freddie Prinze Jr., I guess he's still alive, his son. But I guess it's an actor, comedian, I guess Freddie Prinze Jr. I haven't seen him in anything lately. I don't know anything about it. But his father was very talented, also a comedian. He's a comedian stand-up guy. A lot of these guys, throughout history, I mean, from that to way back and then to more recently, like Seinfeld, they all come from that stand-up comedy, and they put a show around them. So even as a kid, to see this person, and I knew at some point, maybe not right away, that this actor was Puerto Rican, there was playing a Chicano in LA, right? And they had this, I guess they had an auto shop, right? I haven't seen the show probably since it aired, but so full of stereotypes. Even me as a kid in the 70s to watch this show. And the other thing that was fascinating, too, when you talk about this mestizo and the issue with people, within cultures, have issues with people with darker skin or mixed race. So Freddie Prinze Sr. was relatively light-skinned, okay? So they actually put dark makeup on him for this TV series, Fact, to make him look darker. And by the way, if you watch this TV series right now, if you could pick it up on YouTube or whatever, you can tell, you can see little lines around his eyes where he's been browned, So all these things, even as a kid, I knew this. And it's like, as a kid, I'm in elementary school. And these things, what they say about me, first, they can't find a Chicano to play a Chicano. And then they have to brown him up, to, legitimize him. But Cheech and Chong, man, that was something I could not see. Go to the movies. My mother would not let me go see a movie like that because those are R-rated films. They had sex, they had profanity, had drug use. And by the way, nothing wrong with any of those things. Okay, I'm not grudging or judging anybody specifically, but again, this is what was mainstream. But why do they make so much money? Because they actually sold that shtick to whites, to Anglos. That's who's buying this stuff, And so, again, a stereotype put out there by mass media, the television networks, the filmmaking, and these guys made really good money. I mean, Cheech Marin is Mexican American, as I recall. I think Chong is part Mexican American. I don't even know. I don't care. I don't give a frack. Okay. Cheech Marin is a relatively okay actor. He's a good comedian, but I do not forgive them for that film series. Okay. And by the way, when I did get to see the movies eventually, they were not even funny. The humor is so like
infantile.
You have to be on to enjoy this stuff. So anyway, that's my opinion of Stereotypes. My opinion. This way back to the 70s and the 80s. This is my first encounter with American stereotypes of me.
Did you guys ever hear about Danger Island?
No.
It
I
was,
don't know what that is.
one of the characters' his name was Chongo, and he would scream like a monkey. And my friend would send me links of this guy, and I'm trying to find out if he was Latino or he was a Pacific Islander. But it was just, just let me give you an example of how bad the stereotypes of Latinos are. My father-in-law buys Looney Tunes for my daughter, and we're watching Speedy Gonzales. And I used to watch Speedy Gonzales when I was a kid. I would watch it in Spanish, and you wouldn't get the nuances that you get in English. The episode that they pick to sell to kids nowadays is an episode where there's a factory of cheese on the side of America. There's a fence, and Sylvester is on the American side trying to protect the fence, and Speedy comes and helps the other Mexican mice who are trying to break in and steal the cheese. And the whole thing, he's the hero because he's the one that's able to go get the cheese. And it's kind of like the way that African Americans were portrayed in the 30s, where they're stealing the women or they're stealing the resources. And then that was passed on now to Hispanics, where we're coming to take what Americans worked so hard to create, or their daughters or whatever. And it made me so angry that like I threw away the CD, because I'm like, I know Looney Tunes is racist. I know in the 1930s they did a lot of horrible stuff, but this was something that was ingrained in people's minds, and they're still showing reruns of Speedy Gonzales. And there's supposedly some people that like Speedy Gonzales from the Latino community, but it's just like how much more like upfront do they have to be about it? The mouse is brown skin. Everybody talks with a horrible accent. I don't even like the movie Coco because everybody has this horrible accent. But it's this thing that like now people have that in their mind. But in Mexico, they had even a worse cartoon. It was a comic. It was called Memín Pingüín.
Oh.
And it was no. You just yeah, I knew that. I know that. I'm familiar with that.
So now you have an African child that is being made fun by Mexicans, and they've never even seen an African child. So I know that the Spanish and the Portuguese brought a lot of these ideas, but they're so ingrained in the culture that it's impossible to get away from them. Yama, you got some points to make?
Well, no, I was going to say about what you started off with the how in Mexico there is also a level of classism, if you want to use the word, but at the same time that classism is kind of divided into quote unquote racism. The browner or more indigenous usually have less of the of the money, if you want to call it, or the income, than the quote unquote the mestizos or the whiter skin, if that's how you want to call it. And the reality is, yeah, I mean it's a huge gap. I mean, you go to Mexico City, you go to the main cities, and you see that the economic gap, and someone to not want to admit it, I feel is kind of, it's just really trying to put a blind eye into it. I mean, it's the reality. You go there and if, gosh, I almost want to say that, like, if you're not a, you know, certain shade, you don't get the privileges of perhaps going to getting higher in life and economically. I mean, let's be honest. In Mexico, we're talking about Mexico. That's the question that you asked. So I 100% agree with you in that aspect, and how the indigenous or more indigenous people are also stereotyped or just marginalized. You know, they, because a lot of them come from the country, and you know that whole country versus city mentality. If you're from the country, then you got to be really dumb or slow, which is obviously is not even correct. Okay? If you pass any time in anywhere in the country or outside of the urban areas in any country, you know that it's a different type of of uh, of,
Lifestyle.
of lifestyle or development, intellectual development, which is still the people in the country, they know how to survive without the things that people in the city have. You know, it's a very I mean, I feel bad about it because the moment you go back to Mexico, it's kind of like you fall into this this classes like, dude, no, you can't be doing that. You know, you can't be going there. Oh my goodness, no. My whole life in college was, why are you going there? Why are you going there? You got, you know, this is not what we in your quote unquote social class is supposed to go and do. You know, this is for the lower social class. And I'm gonna be honest about it. Is for example, just you know, rock music in Mexico for the longest time before the 90s came with Molotov. Anybody that heard rock in Mexico was darker, had long hair and long black hair, you know, and it was like lower socioeconomic. If it was rock in English, okay, all right, that's cool. But it was national rock, it's like, no man, I don't know. And I lived it. I lived it. You know, I guess I rebelled a little bit, but it wasn't a rebellion. It was just, you know, what you like and what you feel, and it doesn't matter, you know, what the people look like. Now it is hard, I guess, once you're in the place, in the society, to want to do the opposite. It's really hard. The pressure is immense. Even though we were brought up with the mentality that, no, we're all the same and all that kind of stuff, but sometimes you know, you don't relate or hang out with people not the same. Also playing American football in college in Mexico. The majority of people that played American football in Mexico were the same people that would listen to rock music, lower socioeconomic. Um, and the people that play soccer in Mexico, a lot of them have a very high income because they go to all these soccer schools. And football, since American football is, you know, you get like 50, 60 kids per team, you get from everywhere. You know what I mean? So you know, I saw that from just living in you know, doing college there, being the sport, and then doing the type of music that I liked. You know, it's how it is so different to what your social class was supposed to be doing.
But let's talk about it from this perspective. Do you think it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy? Like in America, they tell you stay away from the shady side of town or the rundown place, and it's usually an area where there is no resources, where there's no way for those people to be able to better themselves, because you know there's even areas in Houston where they don't even have grocery stores.
Yeah,
People only go eat at the gas station.
food deserts.
So in Mexico and all of Latin America, it's the same way, where the reason that certain groups stay away from other groups is because those areas are marginalized, and because of the lack of resources, because of poverty, there's a higher crime rate, there's a higher level of lack of education, there's a sense of instability and chaos. So then all the stereotypes become true, because you say, well, I don't go to that side of town because I'm going to get jacked, or I don't hang out with those people because they don't have the cultural knowledge that I do, or they're bringing me down or something like that. So then, even your abuelita would tell you, do not marry those kind of people because their cultural mores are not as sophisticated as ours. And it's this never-ending thing. Like here, why are the majority of the people in prison African American or Hispanic? Is because those communities don't have access to resources. And I'm the biggest critic of Latinos in America when it comes down to crime, because I would say there's always the easy way out, and then there's a way to, even when you're poor, even when you have limited resources, you can still find ways to make an honest living. So then there's also some type of resentment from everyone. Not only are the people in a higher class resentful to the poor, but there's also people who are poor who resent other poor people because they haven't found a way to stay away from trouble and making them look bad. What do you think about that, Jose Figueroa?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly am familiar with that. I think that I kept thinking a couple of different things. So you're when we talk about within American culture, when you have these, so I just want to think about this because sort of let me turn the question around a little bit. I think we have more resources available to us than we used to. When I was a kid, even when we were in college or high school, you were in college and high school. There's no excuse. I mean, I grew up in Third Ward, Houston, and I knew kids that got into trouble and all that. And my sisters didn't get pregnant, and I didn't get into trouble, and I didn't steal or use drugs or anything like that. My mom said, she didn't have to threaten me. Just like that didn't come into our minds. We were raised in a way that just didn't come, single mom. My father and mother separated when I was young, so divorced. So what happened? So whatever the factors are, I can't really know. I don't know what other parents are doing, so I'm not going to judge with the, my friends or whatever. I saw other families like mine, they were saying poor, but we weren't getting in trouble. But I think about things that have changed. So are we, to a certain extent, again, I don't want to have this victim mentality, okay? And so are we, but the problem is we still don't have the role models enough. I go back to the television. So much of role models comes from media, appropriate role models. And so it's amazing. I think of these kids that I'm teaching now. A lot of these kids want to be doctors. They're, this middle school that's for kids who are interested in science and STEM, and they health science specifically, maybe go to DeBakey High School, for the health professions. And so they're African American, they're Latino, they're a lot of tons of minority kids, but also a lot of kids that come, from, it's a magnet school. So a lot of kids have already been exposed to this. Their parents are already doctors and nurses and lawyers and engineers. So they have role models, their own parents or family members. So I think about how I would be different today, because I loved science when I was a kid, in addition to art. I loved art. But I remember from a young age, I always got pushed to art because, he's Mexican. I had a teacher at HSPVA, Ms. Zaytun, who would say, all Mexicans can draw, And when I told her, instead of going to like an art school, I was going to go to Rice, and I wasn't sure what I was going to major in, she looked at me, she turned around and walked away. This is the head of the art department at HSPVA back in 1985. So this is it's like she stereotyped me. It's like, you're an artist, you're Mexican, you can draw, you can paint, that's what you should do. So I think, could I be a doctor today or a lawyer if I had those role models as a kid? And I didn't have anybody, and I still don't have role models. I have friends who are doctors and lawyers, but I have no role models. I don't see that many. I don't know many doctors and lawyers who are Latino. So Tony Diaz,
Yeah.
He's got that show on KPFD, right?
On the radio.
So he just posted something I didn't realize. He came from Chicago, right? Right? Yeah, Elastic Prince or Aztec God, whatever he is, Aztec Love God, whatever. That was his first book. So he came to Houston from Chicago for the U of H creative writing program and got his master's in that, right? I think that's how he got to Houston. He's from Chicago originally. And I've known him for what, like 15 years maybe longer, 20 years, right? And the thing is, he just posted something today that I didn't realize was true. He was the first Mexican American to graduate from U of H's master's MFA in creative writing. Okay, this city has, I think, the third or fourth most largest Mexican American population in the country, right? I think it's like LA, I think San Antonio, Houston, maybe it's right out around there, okay? Maybe Chicago is in there somewhere. Why do we have to bring somebody from, he said the same thing. Why does somebody from Chicago have to come here to get a master's in fine arts and creative writing from U of H? Aren't there a bunch of kids? I know some of them. They're 13 years old who could be mentored and put in. So my thing is, for some reason, we're still, and I blame myself. I mean, I'm part of this. I'm an adult now. I'm 50 years old, okay? So, plus. So, why don't we have the role model still? I mean, I'm not saying Tony's the only one now. I'm sure there's plenty now. But he was the first one when he got this. Makes no absolute, it's one of the great creative writing programs in America. And it's right here in our own backyards. In 3rd Ward, down from 2nd Ward, down from 3rd Ward. Plenty of Latinos around. What's going on to those kids? So the resources are there. It's access to resources and role models. Role models. Are we doing enough to be creative role models? I mean, I think there's enough kids being pushed, I don't know, pushed into arts or whatever. I'm not saying, by the way, everything's great. But are we not, where are we dropping the ball? So anyway, that's just my perspective on that is that again, this victim mentality, we need to think about. I'm not saying that's what you're saying, but I think some of that is we need to find solutions. What is the solution for this?
We need to talk about the culture. You mentioned a lot doctors, engineers, and attorneys. But not everybody values those professions. That's why I was so mad at the movie Coco, because everybody was a peasant. There was one guy who was like an accountant, but everybody else was a peasant. And it's like, I grew up in Mexico watching movies from the 1930s where there was people who were lawyers, attorneys, doctors, and then there was the one Pachuco guy, Tintan, or the one beggar guy. I don't even know what Cantinflas was supposed to be. He was like a peddler, and then they somehow got into the ranks with the rich people. But so in the 1930s, there was this idea that your goal was to be civilized or well trained and do well for yourself. And then everything started kind of going down. Like the different, talk about role models. You would watch these movies where the cowboy would steal a maiden from the fields and then rape her and make her his, and that was one role model, the super macho guy. Then another role model would be these kind of guys that worked in a car shop, and women would just throw themselves at them, and then there was all these kind of soft porn things going on. The movies from the 80s. But when I told my dad that I wanted to go to college, he told me that college was for hippies. He had an associate's from one of the technological schools in Monterey, and he just got enough school that he needed to be able to work and have a better salary than most people who just had the high school degree in Mexico. So for him, it's like, get a technical degree and start working. There was no this idea of literature and humanities and art and things like that. So I think that the value, they would always say, we have one cousin who's an accountant, or we have one cousin who's a lawyer, and they would be proud of that. But it's not like here where those are the ultimate things, like that your parents are proud if you're a doctor. But there's a sense of like, at least have your own business, at least have ability, some type of mobility. And my struggle is that we don't even have Latino artists to look up to. The only Latino artists that we can look up to is people that have been dead for 100 years, and people that we don't even learn much about in high school or in college. So it's kind of like what Yama was saying, that we know bits and pieces of pre-Columbian culture, and then we know bits and pieces of Dio Rivera and other people, and then that's it. There's nothing left. And then it's like, what about all the judges and settlers and businessmen and people who developed the U.S. who were Latinos, and then even back in Mexico, all the presidents and liberators and things like that. None of that information is ever passed on, and I don't think you need role models to be successful, but it does help you feel like you're not the only one doing it. It's like I always talk about how when Obama got elected, it wasn't that it was the first black president, it was the first minority who had the ability to show that anybody can reach that that level. And even though he had some type of royal blood through his mother's side, and he had all the right things, there was a sense of like, okay, we all have access to those type of leadership roles. Yama, what about you growing up? Who were your role models? And then you and I have the experience of transitioning either from America to Mexico or from Mexico to America. So what was your vision of the future? I know your family is pretty well established, but what were the things that made you kind of overcome these stereotypes and overcome these ideas that a Mexican can only be an artist or a comedian or a musician? What was your experience like?
Well, when it comes to role models, I must say that the role models were just like Figueroa said, and like you said, they're in the family, first of all, right? I mean, first of all, my dad being a consul, an uncle being another diplomat representing Mexico in Europe and in South America, another uncle representing Mexico in the UN when he was younger. One of my uncles working for Ford, representing working for Ford in Mexico. Yeah, like all these role models for me were just natural, you know. So for me, it's always been normal. Okay. Yes, when I would come to the U.S. or when I moved to the U.S. or I would watch cartoons in the U.S. or coming from Mexico to the U.S. I guess there were some stereotypes that I guess I could overcome, but because of me looking fair skinned and not being this stereotype of Spanish speaker that they were used to, they never had that bar for me, you know. In fact, I remember one time, and it still really sticks to me. It's really vivid. I think it was a geometry class or an algebra class in my high school in Chicago, in the west suburbs. And there was this girl, and I forgot what the conversation was. And I said, "Oh no, I'm Mexican." And I was either 14 or 15, and she looks at me like, "What? Well, you don't look Mexican." And I remember that was very poignant, right? It was like, it really. I was like, I was kind of like shocked. Like, what do you mean I don't look Mexican? I've always represented Mexico everywhere I go, you know. And when she said you don't look Mexican, I'm like, well, what am I supposed to? What? I didn't understand what she said. You know what I mean? And another moment when you're talking about the stereotype, and it's kind of like, how do they do it? In Detroit, I played soccer. Talk about stereotypes, right? I played soccer, and we went to we were playing this team, and I don't remember what it was, but there was this kid on the other side that just kept on. Again, I was like probably around 10 or 11 years old, 12 years old, and this kid during the game, he said, "Hey, wanna go eat some tacos?" And I kind of just like stopped and I'm like, what the heck does that mean? You know, I was like, it kind of just got me. I'm like, I don't get it. I don't get it. You know, I was like, I paused, and I knew that he was trying to be um, offensive with it. And I'm like, I know he's trying to be offensive, but is there something, you know, is this so? So those have been my like instances where I've like, whoa, I've seen noticed something, but again, because of my fair skin and when I talk with people, they think they think before they even meet me, they think that I'm Mediterranean, I'm Lebanese, or might be Greek or French Mediterranean, or Andalus. You know, it's like they say. I mean, they don't think I'm Mexican. They're gonna think I'm gonna be speaking another language, and when they see Spanish coming out of you, they're like, uh, oh, okay, well, you don't look it. It's like, yeah, I know. I mean, by this time, I already know what's up, especially, teaching what I teach. And then going back to role modeling, like Figueroa said, one of the reasons why I'm still a docent is because a lot of these students, a lot of the kids, since they're kind of like the base of what the quote unquote future is going to be. A lot of these students, their very first real contact with a well-read, well-spoken Spanish speaker, boom, Mexican, because that's what I am. It just for them is I'm the very first contact, and they're like, whoa, like wait a minute, people like you actually speak English, but like you do, they speak Spanish like you do, they correct people, all that kind of stuff that perhaps they've seen with the people around that they're just used to not having um, those expectations. You know what I mean? But there you go.
Okay, but once you fall into the category, so we're breaking stereotypes either by our education, our ability uh, to mobilize through different classes or economic status, our knowledge of the world. But what do you guys think about what happens when it's like we were considered white in Mexico because of the caste system, so we are Spaniard or Criollo white, and then you come to America and suddenly you're just a Mexican, and no matter how many times you say, oh well, we are from one particular group of Mexicans, not the typical Mexican, whatever, most people don't care. You're like, you're just a Mexican, because to them it's almost like putting you down. They like, I even told my wife, you gotta be careful when you use the term Mexican, because to some people it's actually an insult. Like, it's the way they say it. They're like, oh, they're Mexican, and they say it in this like derogatory way. And so what I've seen is kind of like, I was asking about the cholos. What I've seen is that there's cholos who are super light and there's cholos who are super dark. And once they realize that they're never going to be accepted, or they're always going to be seen as the other, then there's this rebellious attitude. And it also goes down to the socioeconomic status. So then you're like, if they're going to call me a thug, if they're going to call me a gangster, I'm just going to be a gangster. And I'm going to embrace that. So then there's this idea of this counterculture, or almost romanticizing the anti-hero, and then taking that upon yourself. So the Pachuco that I was mentioning, it was this idea of Mexican nationals migrating to LA and working there for a while. And then they came up with their own culture, that it was kind of like dressing up like a gangster from the 1920s with the big chain and with the cigar. And that became its own thing. Well, then that developed into the Cholo, where it's like the rebellious gangster who does not care what anybody thinks, and who's gonna stick it up to the man with the low riders and with the fancy cars and trying to attract women from that lifestyle. And for me, that's always been weird. Like, how is it that there's a counterculture that is supposed to be Mexican, and we never experienced that in Mexico? It's like, it's almost like when African Americans say, that they don't relate to Africans because there's such a big gap between African Americans and Africans that they don't really connect with each other. And when I came to America, I thought that America was what I saw in the movies and on the TV shows, where it's a land of opportunity, that the racism had been eradicated. And then I go to this high school, and all I experienced was self-segregation. Every group was segregating on their own, and you can tell. We could say, well, people hang out with people that they like, or people that they remind them of their brothers and cousins, or people that look like them. But it was obscene in the sense of like, I had to find a niche, and since I wasn't the typical migrant, I couldn't fit in that group. Since I wasn't the second generation Hispanic, who are usually into the gangster lifestyle, I didn't fit in that one. And I didn't fit into the preppy white kids or the other groups. So it was this kind of realization that as much as America claims to be more sophisticated and had overcome all the stuff in the past, is actually now institutionalized or ingrained, and there's really little mobility from one group to another. What was your experience like, Jose, growing up, and also with the same issues of having different values or different mores being taught by you by your mother, and were you always struggling to fit in like I did?
Yeah, I mean, I think I always remember struggling to fit in. I think I attended HSPVA also. I remember my elementary school was like 99% African American, and I remember feeling very comfortable with African Americans as a young kid, you know. And it's like I thought of African Americans as American, you know, and so I didn't. It's interesting because I didn't think so much about poverty or race. I'm telling you, my mom would bring it up, well, you know, negrito, she would say. But they were my friends. They were my best friends. They were my peers, right? Then I went to junior high, and that was Lanier. And all of a sudden, there were all these white kids. I've never seen so many white kids in my life, you know? And kids who were, you know, different religions, you know, Jewish kids, and who knows, a lot of Asian kids too. But all these white kids. So it was kind of like a culture shock for me. And I can't remember having a Hispanic friend I had like one maybe at Lanier, right? Latino friend. And I ran into him recently, actually. It was really weird a couple of years ago. Just ran to me. I recognize you from somewhere. Where do I know you from? He said to me. And it was like, you know, like 8th grade at Lanier. So, but that was my transition to HSPVA, which was also mostly white. In the
High School of Performing and Visual Arts of Houston, for those that don't know the acronym, the letters. Go ahead.
Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, the High School for the Performing Visual Arts. And I was a visual arts major there. And but there were, so the way HSPVA works is you audition to get in there. And the programs that are like best in HSPVA, although the visual arts is very important and known within the world of visual art. But the ones that are like programs it's like the jazz program, the music program there, the theater program to a certain extent, because a lot of people have gone on to they've been in Hollywood. Beyonce went to school there, whatever. She didn't graduate from there. But there's this music is the main thing. So the performance part of it, and that's what people think when they think of HSPV, actually. A lot of people do. The outside world. But what happens is a lot of those kids that get in because of the performance, a lot of those kids come from pretty well-off families. And they got all these, lessons, to play their piano, vocal lessons, or whatever. Like HSPV is like the kids that get into the art department are the kids, who just have like a basic talent. You know what I mean? You didn't have to get a lot of training. You're just like naturally skilled. Because I didn't even have any art at Lanier. I did when I was in elementary school, and I was, talented, and I loved art, and I made a lot, and made art even when I didn't have 2 years in junior high. My only point is that it's kind of stratified. You look at like culture, stratified. You have the cast you're talking about. So you have all these kids at HSB, same thing at Lanier, and I saw it right away when I got there. All of a sudden, I realized I was poor. That is, when you're at J. Will Jones Elementary School and everybody else is you, right? Like you. They may be black. You're all low income, socioeconomically. You're the same person, right? The same family. You live in the same neighborhood, the same apartment buildings. You go to the same library. If you get to the library, you shop at the same stores really far away, you know. You're right. The grocery stores, I can't remember where the grocery store is. You get on the bus. Everybody rides the bus. Those are you are. You go to Lanier, people, the parents drop them off at school, right? You go to HSPVA, their parents drop them off at school.
They have their own
My
car.
mother never had a car when I was. The what?
The kids had their own cars.
Kids have their own cars. Exactly. I have friends with cars, convertibles and stuff like that. Very cool. Wonderful people. But, and I made some good friends. But the funny thing is the purpose of people I always gravitated to at HSPV, at Lanier and then HSPV eventually, the people who became closest to me were still African-American because that's who I grew up with in elementary school. Isn't that interesting? And even today, and when I think about my best friends at Rice, black. Several of them. And friends I made from friends that I knew at Rice that actually didn't go to Rice. Maybe they went to U of H or something at the same time. Still friends to this day. I've been to their weddings, you know, that their kids are growing up now, whatever. But they're African-American. It's about this, I lost this part of that growing up. The thing is, so the other thing is, and because maybe sometimes I don't speak English with enough of an accent. So as I became an adult or even at Rice, if people didn't know me, they assumed I was Middle Eastern. They assumed I was Indian from India. Or they weren't sure exactly what I was, right? And again, I didn't fit a stereotype that they expected, you know? And I'm sure that at Rice, there were plenty of people, the white kids who thought I was their own affirmative action. I don't know. I know I just got into school. So, and I graduated. And I have a diploma, looks like everybody else's diploma. So, but I will always remember growing up and sort of having this culture shock from elementary school to junior high to high school to college, where it became really obvious that I was an economic minority, or maybe I'm the majority, whatever. You know, economically, I was lower class. I was a minority, you know, and I was obviously of color. And of course, you get that question: where are you from? I'm from Houston. Well, where are you really from? You know, so. I recently I joined this group, I guess a couple of years ago. Let's sort of wrap it up with this thought, but again about how even when you, as an adult, and you try to help educate other people about this, and how it can be disconcerting when you ask that question, where you're from. That I joined this group. It's Pantsuit Nation. It's sort of this group that's sort of mostly a women. It's like 4,000 women on it and a few men like me, because I support women's rights and so forth. And a friend invited me to join, right? So I joined this group on Facebook, and I would post things on a regular basis. And I posted this article that was from, I think, the Washington Post or something like that, a major publication about LA Times. It was an LA Times columnist writing about himself being Latino and being at parties in LA, you know, maybe Hollywood parties, and having kind of cornered about where are you from. And this happens to Asian Americans. It can happen to anybody, right? But it happens to these two groups, us Latinos, Asian Americans, but now people obviously from, you know, Middle Eastern descent, right? They get it. But you have that growing up. And so I post this article, and the article was written in a first person, right? So he says, I that. So to get past the paywall, I copied all the text. I put it into the body of the the commentary there, so people could actually read it, right? And otherwise you couldn't, you know, click on it, they probably wouldn't be able to read it. And everybody thought it was my story. I mean, if you click, you can see, you don't even have to click this. I mean, click the story. It still tells you it's written by somebody else. It's not written by Jose, who lives in Houston. It's somebody in LA, columnist. But people got very defensive. White women got very defensive about, why can't I ask you where you're from? And there was all this anger came up. And by the way, it went on, and I had nothing to, I stayed out of it. It just, the whole comments became this back and forth. And this one white woman says, I'm just going to keep doing what I've been doing. I have no problem with asking people where they're from. I'm celebrating diversity, but I want to know. That's the problem is the first question that comes out of a lot of people's mouths who are white, who see someone who is of color or with a different name of any color, is, where are you from? It's not like, hey,
tell me more about
you. What do you like? What do you do? What's funny?
Yeah,
it's not anything laid back. It's always like they want to peg you, from a group. Anyway, so that's what I wanted.
Well, I have a more developed story in relation to that, where there was a women's conference in, I think, what's that hippie town? There's a hippie town in Virginia that everybody says is like the best town in the world, but it's the same thing.
Hippie town.
There's only
Virginia?
it's mostly white people who live there. So my friend who's has heritage from the Philippines and from Euro Americans, as I call them, she goes to the event, and they have this tent, or this like thing where it's only for multicultural women or ethnic women or diverse women, and so all of us. I even had people tell me, we black and brown need to stick together, and I'm like, I'm not brown, right? And then they get mad because they're like, oh, so you're ashamed of being Mexican. It's like, if you're talking about colors, you cannot categorize all Mexicans as colors because we are multifaceted. We're polychromed. But so whatever with that, the tent was actually ran over or attacked by some white women who felt discriminated. So they felt like the victims because the other ones were being discriminatory. And I had a problem with them having a no whites allowed tent, because then you're being like back in the 50s where no blacks were allowed or no Mexicans were allowed. So now you're doing the same thing. And then but the white women weren't even willing to accept that there is a difference. They're like, as women, we all need to stay the same. And this thing about, I have the right to ask people where they're from. I'm actually celebrating the culture. Like one time somebody asked me, where are you from? And I said, I'm a citizen of the world. And they were mad. They were like, you should be proud of being Mexican. And the guy was French or something. It's like, I don't care where you're from. If your ancestors were French or German or whatever, that's fantastic. But I'm not going to make a big deal out of it. And if you're proud of being German, that's wonderful. And if I were to be, someone wearing a I Love Mexico shirt, people shouldn't look down on me either. But that's not my thing. I'm not a very patriotic or nationalistic person. And it was funny today, we're talking about nationalism, and they're like, because of the increase in minorities, there's been this increase in nationalism throughout the world. And it's like, what about black nationalism or Hispanic nationalism? Like, not all nationalism is racist. Some nationalism is actually finding an identity and feeling proud of who you are. But then they would always say, well, how is it the blacks and Hispanics can have nationalism and then whites can't have their own form of nationalism? Because theirs is always at the exclusion of the others. It's never like, we're proud of who we are and they can be proud of who they are and we're all brothers and sisters. No, it's always this, we're proud of who we are and we want to destroy everyone else. And so maybe we'll talk about that next time. But Yama, how about you? Like Jose was talking about kind of like fitting in or people questioning you. You mentioned that they assume that you're from somewhere else, but to finish up, do you ever bring that up to your students? Can we be unique in ourselves? we're made up of all these different facets of who we are. Is being patriotic or proud of your nationality a thing, or should we? I know you talked about assimilation last time, or should we kind of transcend that and talk more about our connection to everyone as a human being, and your background is part of you, but is it everything about you? And you said that when you grew up, you realized that you could reclaim your ancestry or your culture, but is there such a thing as people who could say that they're acultural or a-nationalistic, like where they're just people? Is that where we're heading to, or we're becoming even more and more segregated and stuck in what some people would call tribalism?
Well, in my opinion, I think right now, as people all over the world are beginning to have access to more information via the internet, I think the majority of the people, and I can talk about myself, why not? Using me as example is I want to learn more about what the origins of where I was from, and I'm pretty sure kids that are born here from whatever nationality their parents were from, or if they were brought here when they were little, they probably now have this curiosity of, oh, where am I from? What is this? You know, a sense of belonging, which is normal. Everybody wants to have a sense of belonging to something. You know, be it comics, be it sport, be it religion, be it whatever it is. You want to have some sort of a sense of belonging, like you matter somewhere. You know, where what you do matters somewhere. Um, about people being acultural, basically like I'm a citizen of the world. That by itself, that by itself starts to make you into a niche. You know, it's like now I'm an acultural. You know what I mean? And then it's you can start going there, which I mean I think the Star Trek kind of alludes to that once we went into space, we weren't the black, white, yellow. We were all Earthlings, representing Earth. And I think that could eventually, I mean, once we start meeting people that are not Earthlings, you're like, oh, okay, we're Earthlings, you're not. That kind of stuff. I think it can happen. But like I mentioned right now, with all this information, all this awakening, people saying they're awoke now, people having a little bit, being a little bit more brave to represent what they are. Back in the day, you couldn't even say, "Hey, I'm Mexican." I'm from Mexico. I'm wearing a shirt like this. I'm wearing this. Back in the day, you couldn't. Now you're like, yeah, of course I can. As long as it's in a positive light. Not using it to chastise, to make less another culture. You're like insulting your culture. In that aspect, that's how I see it.
Okay, we're gonna leave it at that. We've already done an hour, unless you guys want to stick around for another hour, and we can have 3 shows. We're gonna take a break during the winter holidays, so this one's gonna broadcast on the 17th, I believe, and then it's gonna broadcast on the 19th on the radio, and then the next one is gonna come out on the 9th of January. So if you guys want to do a third one, we have 2-3 weeks to come up with that one, so it can go out on the 16th. And I just feel like we still don't know anything about Latin America. Like we know about Mexico, we know about the U.S., but we don't know anything about Argentina, Colombia, El Salvador. I guess if you guys meet anybody at a pupuseria or some other dancing place where Figueroa goes to, bring them
dancing place.
Yeah, well,
Talking about stereotypes.
Swing dance.
I know all these. I know people from all those groups. True.
Well, we need Afro-Cubans, Afro-Colombians. We need.
I'm gonna go try to see some of them tonight. I gotta go to downtown for some music after this. I'll see a bunch of Afro-Cubans there.
I wonder how they see us.
Night.
Or how, like, I'm sure people just call them Mexicans. They don't even know that there's a difference.
Well, and that's the thing. Just on your point and on Yama's point, that I think we all, the three of us, embrace everything that we are, our history, and we're also curious about other, but we sort of people want to categorize everything, and or they want to put some people feel like they need to go into this thing, that it's all about Tony Diaz, I think that's what he does, and a lot of it's just, his message is always about Latino culture and all that, and I'm not, I want to be more than that. I don't want to be, I'm not a spokesman for Mexican Americans, or, you know what I mean? And so I think that's, and I think I see that, I agree with Yama, that I see a point where this won't be, at least in America, it won't be like that, but hopefully.
Okay. Well, I thank you for participating. I hope everybody has good holidays. There's a lot of stuff going on the next couple of weeks, and we hopefully we are expanding people's minds. This show plays in Nashville, and Nashville has a very small population of Hispanics. And when I turned on the TV one time, all the crimes were being committed by the 10 Latinos they had in Nashville. So I was very disturbed by that. So hopefully they'll get other perspectives of, there's people who actually are staying away from.
I've been there. A good friend who lives there. I'm going to ask her about that.
Have you been there, Yama?
Nashville, Tennessee?
Yeah.
No, I've been to North Carolina. Does that count?
Well, since they think you're Greek, you're like once Trump got elected, this guy went up to my dad and said, you can go either way. You're flying under the radar.
Yeah.
And you know what he meant? He meant that my dad wouldn't get deported as easily as all the rest of us. And I just couldn't believe that they want to deport everyone, not only the people who are here undocumented. So it's funny that they felt that Trump was going to vindicate them and get rid of all the undesirables. So we'll talk more about that next time. So thank you guys for participating, and we'll see you.
Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you.